Hi, I'm Caitlin with the Yarn Barn, and today I'm going to show you how to use intentional stitch dropping to fix a variety of errors in your knitting. We'll cover how to put a yarn over back where it belongs, how to retrieve a dropped stitch that you didn't notice for a couple of rows, how to fix an error in stockinette stitch, and how to recross a cable that's crossed the wrong direction. We're going to talk about how to drop down and correct mistakes. I've got my swatch here with several mistakes. So there's a little lace pattern over here, but I forgot to do a yarn over. So we'll fix that. We've got a drop stitch here that's running away from me, and then we've got a section down here where I forgot what stitch pattern I was doing. So I've got a bit of garter in the middle of my stockinette section. And one of the easiest ways to fix these mistakes, rather than ripping out all of your work and coming all the way back down here and having to redo all of it, is to just drop the specific stitch columns that have the issue in them. So you work like normal until you get right above where the problem is, and then intentionally drop a stitch so that you can go fix the issue. So I need to get over to here. Okay, so I've gotten to this next stitch is the one that has the decrease in it, but there needs to be a yarn over right before it to keep my lace pattern intact. So I'm going to take that stitch off the needle entirely. Sometimes it helps to have a spare double point to help pull out each stitch just in this column until I get down to, here's my decrease. It's one stitch, two stitch sitting on here. So I'm going to pull that out. And now I'm going to have two loose stitches. And if that makes you nervous, that's where the double point comes in. You can grab those and now they can't go anywhere while you're working. So to maintain my lace pattern, this first stitch should have been worked plain. So I'm going to take my needle tip, find the strand of yarn that belongs to that row, and pull it through, just like working with your working yarn. This is the working yarn for this row. It's a little fiddly. And then I need to put a yarn over in, so I'm gonna dip my working needle under there. And to put the decrease that's associated with that yarn over in, I actually need to drop this stitch over here so that I have two stitches free to do the decrease with. So I'm just gonna take that second one out. All the way down to here. There we go. And then grab those two stitches to do a knit two together. And this is where it's very, very fiddly because the working yarn is just this tiny little strand that's already incorporated into the row. So you have to kind of work as much slack as you can to get it loose enough. And it can help if you use a crochet hook or that spare double point to pull it over the needle tip. Gosh, I thought this would be smoother. Might have to do this again. Okay, pull that yarn up and over your needle tip so that you can work the decrease. This is especially tricky when you have to insert a yarn over where there wasn't one before. You've used basically one stitch more yarn than you started with, so it can make this row a little tight until you block your piece, and then you can resettle things so that they behave. So then we have to take all of these dropped stitches and work them back up to where we are. And you can do that one column at a time. It's really easy in stockinette because you can take your crochet hook and just grab each row's yarn and work your way up. So I'm just taking the working yarn for the row, pulling it through the existing stitch all the way up until I get back to my working row. And then I'm just going to drop it on this needle tip to hold it until I get the other stitches handled. So here's my yarn over that should have been in there. I've got 1, 2, 3 rows up, and then we'll put it on this needle tip. Retrieve my crochet hook from there. Oops. Okay, there's one last stitch column that needs to be brought up. So again, find the working yarn for the row above, which is right here. Pull that through. And then the next row. And then there's one more row to get to where I am currently in my knitting. And then the only remaining thing is to slip those stitches that we've just pulled up back onto the left needle because they haven't been worked in this row yet. So I'll spread this out so it's easier to see. So now you can see it's a little loose up here because I had to manipulate the yarn quite a bit to get my lace pattern back in there. But I'll just work along.
Okay, we'll do that. Perfect. Thank you for following up. Have a good day.
And I can come in with my double point here and just tug on the yarn to move around that slack and get it where I want it to be. Use a similar technique to retrieve a dropped stitch. So this stitch has dropped down several rows, so you can take your crochet hook, grab, oops, make sure you grab the whole stitch and you don't split the plies, and then find the working yarn for the next row up, pull it through the stitch, then find the next row, and pull it through. The longer it's been since the stitch dropped, the tighter that yarn's gonna be, but that's okay. You can just wiggle your fabric, get enough loose yarn that you can grab it with the hook and pull it up. If you end up with a very slight tight spot in your knitting, you'll be able to block it out and it will be just fine. Pull that last one through, all right. And then that stitch goes on the left needle where it would be if it had been there the whole time. And we can go ahead and work it. And then the last problem that I have in this swatch is way down at the beginning. I got too excited about working garter stitch and didn't realize until I was a couple stitches into my stockinette section. So I'm going to fix this one column at a time rather than dropping all three, because when you drop multiple stitches next to each other, it makes a bigger area where your tension can get off. So if you are concerned about messing up your tension, just do one stitch at a time. And that way you only have one stitch worth of yarn loose, so your tension stays pretty stable. So this one's gonna take me a little while to drop down to, and I'm just gonna pop each bit of working yarn out of the stitch. If you're using something like a sticky wool or a mohair, this stage is the part that takes the longest, and you just wanna sit and work at it methodically. Don't yank at the yarn, you don't wanna break it. Just keep going until you get to where your stitch pattern is intact. And then grab each loop of working yarn and pull it through the stitch. And I mentioned earlier that stockinette is the easiest stitch pattern to do this in, and that's because you can keep your hook in that stitch and just pull each successive loop through. If you're doing something like garter stitch or any other textured stitch, you'll need to pay attention to whether it was a knit stitch or a purl stitch. Make sure you pull the loop through the right direction to recreate that type of stitch.
It's okay. Oh, so I'll leave the pattern.
All right, so I'm back up at the top. I'm gonna drop that stitch on my left needle. So now if we look at it, that little garter section that was sticking into my stockinette is one stitch column shorter, because this column is the one we just fixed. here's the swatch. We've got eyelets where they weren't before. We've got no more drop stitches in the middle, and you can see my tension has been manipulated enough just by me messing with the swatch further that you can't really tell where that drop stitch was. And the same down here, that little bit of garter was sticking in right here, and the stitches are almost as even as if I had done it right to begin with. Any remaining discrepancies, like you can see this leg is just a little bit longer than its neighbor. Those will block out and you'll never be able to tell where the error was. So you can, if you find that you've crossed a cable the wrong direction, like I have here, this whole thing should twist this direction, and I got distracted and swooped over and made kind of a snake cable instead of a normal one. You can just drop the cable stitches down to where your last cross was, recross them the correct direction, and then work them all back up. This is a little more complex than dropping just one stitch at a time, because in a cable you need all of the cable stitches loose at the same time. What I've created is a 6-stitch cable, so I'm going to have 6 total stitches loose by the time I've dropped everything to fix the mistake. But this is a fairly grippy wool yarn, so it's totally fine to have that many stitches off the needles at once, as long as I don't really yank on the swatch or, give it to my dog to play with. It's going to be just fine. So first, I'm going to just slip the stitches that I don't need to drop over onto my right needle, so they're out of the way and safely on a needle. And here's my first cable stitch. Ooh, I misspoke. This is an 8-stitch cable. So I've got 4 on this side and 4 on that side of the cable. So I'm going to drop all of these stitches and pull down until I get to where that cross was, so that I can twist them the correct direction. I'm just going to slide my needle out of all 8 stitches, and then I like to pull my needle tips up so that while I'm working on the cable, my other stitches don't drop while I'm not paying attention to them. It's nice to have a double point or a crochet hook to help you pull out the working yarn, especially when you're working with something kind of sticky. This is nature spun, so it wants to cling to itself. These stitches don't want to come out. They need a little bit of coaxing. And I'm just going to keep pulling out one row at a time, very gently, until I get to the cable cross, which should be, let's see, one more row. And you can tell when you've gotten to the cross because that cable will pop open so that you have a flat piece of fabric here. So here's my uncrossed cable. I'm going to take all of this working yarn and just stuff it to the back so that I can see what I'm doing. If you have a long enough circular needle, you can just pull some extra cable out and slip those stitches back onto it. Or if your needle's not long enough for that, or that makes the fabric too contorted for you to be able to see it well, you can take your double point and just grab all of these loose stitches so they don't drop any further. We don't need to undo any more than this. Part of the trick with grabbing these stitches is you want to make sure that you get both plies, or all 3 plies depending on your yarn, and you don't tug too hard to secure the stitches that are on the needle, because all of this yarn's connected. So if you pull too hard on these guys, you're going to unzip some of the other stitches that you don't want to drop any further. So just do it gently and slowly. Check to make sure that you've got all the stitches on the needle. So I'm going to count again. 2, 3, 4 on that side, 4 on that side. Okay, so that's all my stitches. Now what I need to do is I need to move these 4 stitches over here. So I'm just gonna slip those onto another spare needle. Cross them the correct direction. Okay, I lied, this is my crochet hook. You can use any tool handy as long as it will hold the stitches and you can get them off of it again. And I'm just going to reposition all the stitches. So now my cable cross has been executed. And I'm going to lay it flat and double check that I did in fact cross it the correct direction. It's very easy to recreate the same mistake that you had originally. Then I need to find, out of this mass of thread, I want the bar that comes from the very next row up from the cable cross. All the rest of this is for later. You don't have to worry about it yet. This is the yarn that you want because it's the next piece that needs to work through all these stitches. And this is sufficient yarn to do these stitches. There's no extra like there is with your normal working yarn. So the yarn's gonna define how big your stitches end up being. So you don't need to worry too much about your tension. It will sort itself out as you go. And then you can take your crochet hook, slip it through the first stitch that needs to be worked, and use it to grab a loop of that working yarn, pull it up and through, and then go to the next stitch. Make sure you've got the same working yarn. It's very easy to grab the wrong piece of yarn. And then just keep working along, going one stitch at a time. Put the hook through, pull a loop from that strand of working yarn. You can also do this with double points. You'll just work like your normal knitting. You can do it with the tips of your project needles, whatever you have handy. The crochet hook just makes it a little easier to pull that loop through, especially as you get toward the end and it gets smaller. There's less of it for me to tension with my fingers, so it's easier to grab if I use a crochet hook. All right. And then I'm going to take all these stitches, slip them right back onto my double point. Because instead of flipping the work over and doing the purl side, it tends to be easier to work from the knit side whenever possible when you're picking up dropped stitches, which is essentially what we're doing. So I'm just going to work always on the knit side of the work. And I'll do the same thing. Put the hook through, find the correct strand of yarn, next one in the sequence, and then pull loops through. Okay, so we're back up to working level, and I'm gonna slip all these stitches off my crochet hook finally back onto my working needle, and you'll see I've got some serious tension issues going on now because I was working on much smaller needles and hook than my actual working needles, and that's partly because it's easier to manipulate the stitches with something that's a much smaller diameter than the stitches need to be. However, it creates this extremely loose column over here at the left side of the cable. You can mitigate that if you work on your working needles. You'll just have a much tighter go of it for these last couple of stitches because you'll have only exactly enough yarn to do that. Or you can do what I did, and then you can come along with your double point and just tug at the yarn and work your way across the row. This will make you very, very good at identifying which stitches belong to a specific row. And you're just going to work that slack along until it's distributed more. So pull this down and then tug that up. If you're someone who makes socks and you're familiar with grafting, this is pretty much the same pattern you use there. You're just chasing the yarn along instead of inserting it with the needle. So you can see those first couple of rows where I've adjusted it, it's not nearly so sloppy over here at the left edge. So I'd work all the way up, move all that slack over into the cable fabric, and it'll look just as good as the previous cables. The other thing I want to mention is that with this technique, it's pretty easy to inadvertently twist your stitches. You can get knit stitches where instead of them sitting straight on your needle, you end up with them sitting like this. And if you look very closely, you can see the legs of this stitch are crossed rather than open like a horseshoe. It's not the end of the world, and in the midst of a cable, nobody's likely to notice, but if that bothers you, as you're working, just double check that you've always got the right leg of the stitch sitting on the front of your needle, and the left leg should be sitting at the back. And maybe after every row, just spread your work out and double check all of your stitches are making these nice little V's or horseshoe shapes all the way across so that you don't end up with any inadvertent twisted stitches after you've done all this work to fix your cable.